Detective Roberts, when you testified previously in this case, do you recall indicating that the reason that, or one of the reasons Mr. Baker would have taken a circuitous route is because he didn't want to be picked up by the cameras by the Payless store, not knowing that they were going to be destroyed in 30 days? Wasn't that?
I'm going to object. That's argumentative in the second half of the question.
I'll allow.
My question is, wasn't that one of your theories when you testified a few days ago?
I mean, maybe in a different, I don't remember it as you're stating it.
Well, what was the reason that you gave, if you recall, why Mr. Baker had to take that circuitous route around the building, as you described it, to get to the Sementilli's car? Why wouldn't he just walk from where he parked to the car?
I mean, yeah, if he knew there was cameras on the target, to go undetected by the cameras that were visible.
Okay, and I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, you also opined that he did not want to be caught by any of the cameras that were visible on the Payless.
Yes, at that point where he's actually meeting up with Monica, and I believe that there's statements to that effect in some of the overhears.
Okay, but going back to your theory, was they didn't know, or Mr. Baker didn't know, that the cameras would be destroyed in 30 days, so he was trying to avoid that when you say he entered Miss Sementilli's car.
I don't believe that he didn't know there was cameras. I believe that they were trying not to be captured on the target camera.
Not the Payless camera or the cameras on the wall there.
Correct.
Okay. Let's go. Back to the route that Ms. Sementilli says she took and the time it took her to get home. Do you recall reading an interview of her by Parshall, Tellis, and Gable on May 18, 2017, about 3 weeks or 4 weeks before her arrest?
Is that the interview with the knock-knock ruse?
Yes.
I don't recall reading it. I listened to it.
Okay. And in it, didn't whoever was questioning her ask her again to describe her route that she took from the target to home on the day of the murder?
I don't recall.
Wasn't that the route that you were relying on and saying that it shouldn't have taken her 11 minutes to get home?
I drove every possible route that you could drive, and it never took me more than 5 minutes was the longest it took me.
No, I'm not quarreling with that. I'm saying she had to remember 4 months later in an interview a route she took on the day of the murder from the Ralph's home, and remember if she had a cigarette or stopped for listen to music or whatever 4 months later. Isn't that true?
I'm going to object, remember, it's now cumulative.
So rule.
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
Isn't it true that the route that you've relied on in terms of what Monica Sementilli said she took the day of the murder was from the interview of her on May 18th, 2017?
No, that's not correct. I didn't rely on any route because I drove every possible route you could drive, including the one that she gave.
Okay, but you would agree that it'd be hard to remember 4 months earlier whether you had a cigarette or stopped for some other reason on the way home.
Objection, speculation.
This thing.
Okay. Now, whoever was in on the murder, I assume, would want to have given, based on your investigation, time for the Porsche to escape and leave the scene and not be apprehended 2, 3, 4 minutes after the murder.
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
So, are you aware of when, first of all, Monica Sementilli actually arrived home?
Yes.
And what time was that?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'd have to refer to the...
Would you mind? Because I'm going to get into that with her daughter as well. So, do you have that?
I don't have it with me. When I retired, I don't have any of the investigative materials.
No, but I'm sorry. You were shown that whole chart and,
sure.
and video of cars coming and going and where they were and so forth the day of the murder, correct?
Correct.
All right. And referring back to that, it had Miss Sementilli arriving about a minute after Baker and Austin are seen leaving in the Porsche, correct?
I'm going to object that misstates the evidence.
It's about...
It's vague because I don't know which Ms. Sementilli you're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Monica Sementilli arrived at the residence the day of the murder to find her daughter Bella there and her murdered husband, correct?
Yes.
Okay. We'll get to Bella, but how long, but there fortunately is a camera, the one camera apparently that was working in that whole area, that caught the people coming up, running up the street, and the cars leaving the house on the day of the murder, correct?
Yes.
And it caught the two joggers covered up, the two killers, and then it caught the cars involved leaving or coming, correct?
Correct.
All right. So we know that the two murderers are in the house. We know that the Porsche is seen leaving the house, correct?
Yes.
The next person to come home within a minute or less is Bella, correct?
Correct.
And right after her is Monica, correct?
Yes, about a minute after.
So by that timeline, the Porsche basically had a minute or less to leave the area and get away clean without getting stopped or arrested by the police, right?
Well, I mean, we would assume that the police would know that a murder had occurred.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. When the 911 call was made, then the 911 operator asked, if they saw anything else and told that the victim's Porsche was seen leaving and give the license plate?
I believe when the 911 call came in, it came in more as a medical emergency because it wasn't reported as a murder because the daughter didn't know what had happened to her father.
Okay. And when did the police, as far as you know from reviewing all the reports and records, first learn that a murder had occurred and a Porsche vehicle with the license number belonging to Fabio Sementilli had left the scene with the murderers inside?
I believe the police got to the location maybe within 20 minutes of the 911 call because it was originally, but I don't know that it was known that the Porsche was actually taken until the detectives arrived on scene and started conducting interviews, but I'm not 100% certain on that.
So either the officers who got there first or the detectives, someone found out that night that the Porsche was taken, stolen, and it contained the two murderers, correct?
Correct.
Was an immediate broadcast put out over the air? Look for Porsche license number containing two murders.
I don't recall.
In fact, it wasn't, was it?
Honestly, I don't recall.
It was listed the next day as a stolen vehicle, and a flyer went out. Isn't that what happened?
Your Honor, I'm going to object that it assumes facts, not evidence.
Overruled.
I honestly, I don't recall whether a crime broadcast was put out.
Do you know if any helicopters were flying over and were put over the scene to see if they could find the Porsche or cars in the neighborhood? Police cars were traveling around to see if they could find the Porsche the night of the murder?
If I had the calls, the comments of the call, which should be in the murder book, all that would be in it,
Well,
including whether a crime broadcast was put out by responding officers.
well, okay, maybe you can review that, but my question is, having reviewed it, why wasn't a broadcast put out immediately for that Porsche?
Again, I'm going to object. This is facts, not an evidence.
Sustained.
All right. Would you agree, as part of your investigation, that the murderers who were involved in this killing would have wanted more than a minute, if this was being planned, to get away from the scene?
Same objection calls for speculation.
Okay. Now, Bella Sementilli was the first one, Isabella, to find her father's dead body, correct?
Correct.
And she was there even sooner than Monica, correct?
Unfortunately, correct.
Absolutely. And do you know, also, isn't it fair to say that the murderers were at least in the house after 5:37 or 5:40 when I'm sorry. Okay, so the murder takes place about they leave about 4:58 or 5 o'clock, is that right?
Sounds about.
And there's some communication between Fabio on his phone or a voicemail or something that he leaves at 4:36 or 4:37, isn't that right?
Correct.
So it's clear, at least at that time, he was alive.
Yeah, you would assume that he was alive at that time.
And the Porsche is seen leaving the garage at what time?
Again, I would have to refer
Could you
to,
please?
I don't have any documents that have that timeline. It was an electronic timeline, but it should be in the investigative materials.
May I approach, Your Honor? I'm showing you a document that, and you tell me if you recognize this document. I opened it to the time of the murder, but it looks like it starts early in the morning. Do you recognize that? Have you haven't seen that timeline?
I haven't seen this timeline, but
Yeah, Your Honor. So that's not a document from us.
I have a Viber timeline that might have the information in it.
Okay, here's the front page. Do you recognize that at all?
I don't recognize this.
Okay. Then why don't you look at your...
I can see if I have it in that. I can see. Your question again, Mr. Levine, was what time did the Porsche leave?
Yes. Roberts, I'm going to have Mr. Roberts put on the screen the video or the...
I have 16:56 and 47 seconds.
I'm going to have him put up... Would you look at the screen to your
Yes.
right? Okay. This is the...
Can I just identify, I know it's an exhibit, and if you don't know Mr. Levine, I'm sure Mr. Babbage knows it.
Exhibit 158, Your Honor, PK 158.
Thank you, Mr. Babbage.
Thank you, Mr. Babbage. Looking at that, does that appear to be the document you referred to in your testimony a few days ago?
Correct.
Okay. So does it indicate at what time Baker and Austin were seen northbound on Winnetka, having left the scene of the murder?
Yes, 4:56 p.m.
And then Bella arrives at...
I'm sorry.
That's right.
Oh, that was on Wells Drive. So 4:53, Baker and Austin are seen leaving the residence.
Okay, 4:53. Now, Isabella returns to the residence at 4:54. Do you see that?
Correct?
So had she arrived a minute earlier, she would have come in on the murder, or at least the parties leaving the garage and the Porsche, correct?
Yes.
Now you're also aware that prior to that time, sometime 5-10 minutes before then, Monica Sementilli communicated with Bella and vice versa. Is that correct? Do we have that? Can we put that up there? The okay. You see those calls, incoming, outgoing?
You would have to back up. That's to the eye doctor. Okay, Isabella's at 4:24.
Where is Isabella, according to your...
Over the well, he keeps going back and forth, but if he goes
Sorry. Can you
right
put
there.
up the whole thing, Mr. Babbage? Okay.
It's at 4:24 and 27 seconds. If you see that?
Yes, and then it goes to 4:28. There's another outgoing call. You see that?
Yep.
Now,
But that outgoing call is to that is not to the daughter, that's to the eye doctor.
okay.
Yeah.
So there are a series of calls around 4:24, 4:27, and 4:28.
Yes.
Around 4:30, between Monica Sementilli and her daughter Bella, correct?
Correct.
And it has to do with something with an eye doctor who's also called or calls Monica at the same time, correct?
Yes.
And it's clear that Monica Sementilli is in touch with her daughter Bella in one or more of those calls, correct?
If you can go back just one, just so I can see who the call is to. Not that one, but the. Yes.
Okay. Now, what you're saying is Monica Sementilli on the phone, knowing that her lover and his partner are at the house killing her husband, knowing that Bella is going to the eye doctor perhaps, lets her do so and doesn't say anything like, wait for me, I'll meet you for lunch, I'll meet you for coffee, anything to delay her from coming to the house. She allows her to go right to the house and almost walk in on the murder, correct?
Yes.
That's argumentative, and we also don't know what was said.
Excuse me. Is argumentative sustained on that ground?
Move to strike.
You don't strike comments of counsel.
I'm
They are
sorry.
not evidence. Comments of counsel are not to be stricken. They're not evidence.
It wasn't that I was striking. It was the answer.
Any answer would be stricken.
Thank you.
Well, you heard on the overhear Monica indicating that her attorney had learned that Bella was not intentionally delayed at all and was going to use that as evidence in the case. You heard that in the overhear, right?
She just states the evidence.
Did you hear something to that effect in the overhear?
That Bella was delayed?
That Bella was not intentionally delayed, even though she was on the phone with her mother. Her mother did nothing to delay her from going to the house and potentially walking in on the murder.
I heard a lot of self-serving statements on the overhears, and I also heard a lot of incriminating statements on the overhears.
Fair enough. You can characterize them any way you want. That's why we have a jury. I don't want to know if you heard that statement.
I don't recall in that specific wording.
But the essence of my question is, would you agree that according to this evidence, Monica Sementilli was in touch with her daughter 15 minutes before the murder took place, maybe less time? Correct?
I would have to see the timeline again.
Well, if she's talking to her at 4:24, 15 minutes would be 4:39. We know Fabio was alive at 4:37, so he's murdered right after that, because the Porsche is seen leaving at 4:50, what, 6? 4:53 they're leaving the residence.
I would agree that she's talking to her daughter because we
Okay.
have the evidence.
And you would agree that whatever she said to her daughter, and that's not in the record, her daughter went right home from the eye doctor and basically almost walked right into a murder. Correct?
Again, assumes facts, not evidence.
Sustained.
Well, she arrived home within a minute of Baker and Austin leaving the residence. Correct?
Yes,
And immediately called 911.
correct.
And therefore, Baker and Austin had maybe a minute or two to get out of the scene, and Baker to go park the car somewhere, and Austin to be left out, and neither one of them were apprehended that night, correct?
Correct.
And it would mean that Monica Sementilli, if she was in on the murder, would have allowed her daughter, Bella, to be the first one to uncover or discover her father brutally knifed to death by Austin and Baker, correct?
That is what I believe, yes.
Okay. So there's no question, time-wise, she had to know her daughter was going to be there right around the time the murder took place.
Yes, and I believe that's why she sends out the Viber message to Robert Baker about, 5 minutes before her daughter comes home, 10 minutes,
So
to let
it's-
him know she's coming home.
So it's intentional.
I don't know that it's
You don't know
intentional.
what the message is to Baker, do you, the Viber message?
No, because it's encrypted out.
Oh, fine, okay. So you don't know whether she has any idea what Baker's doing or not doing. You just know there was a message back and forth, correct?
Oh, I think she knows what Baker's
Well,
doing.
I know what you think. I'm just asking you if you can tell by the fact there was a Viber contact what the message was.
In the totality of
No,
the day,
No, in
Your
the...
Honor, again, I'm going to object and ask.
Well, she's not answering the question.
I'm trying to.
I'll withdraw the question and rephrase it. What does encrypted mean?
It's scrambled. We can't get the messages.
So do you know the contents of the message, the Viber message from Monica Sementilli to Robert Baker that we're discussing, right shortly before the...
No, I don't know the content to any of the Viber messages.
Okay. Everything else is your conclusion, speculation, or intuition, or however you want to call it. That's your job as an investigator.
Your Honor, I'm going to object again to counsel testimony.
It was argumentative, so stand on that ground.
Okay. So, Bella arrives, and then Monica arrives a minute thereafter, right?
Yes.
Now, are you aware that at some point Baker says to Austin, we better get out of here, Monica's at the target?
I'm going to object. Assumes facts, not evidence.
I'll allow it.
I don't recall those specific words.
You don't recall that in one of the interviews or proffers of Mr. Austin?
I didn't listen to the proffer.
Okay.
If it's in the proffer, but
So you don't know whether Mr. Baker, there's evidence of Mr. Baker worrying about whether Bella's going to show up or commenting on the fact that, whoa, we just missed her. Anything of that nature? Did your investigation reveal that?
I don't recall anything of that nature.
Okay. Did the investigation that you participated in before you come to the conclusion that Austin was in the trunk of the car?
No.
Did you eventually learn that that's what he claimed?
Yes, that's eventually what he testified to.
Okay. But you didn't listen to any of his interviews before his testimony?
As I testified prior, I listened to the Perkins and his interview up in Washington, but I did not listen to the proffer.
So in his interview and his Perkins, and we all know what Perkins is, the undercover officer that the suspect, Austin, doesn't know or is not supposed to know is working for the police, correct?
Correct.
At any time during those interviews, does he say that he was in the trunk of the car?
Not that I remember.
And in none of those interviews does he even say that Monica Sementilli planned the murder with Mr. Baker, does she? Does he?
I'm going to object as to interviews. She only heard.
I know, it's also cumulative.
All right, I'll withdraw that. They speak for themselves. So let's go back to then how we get to Mr. Austin to begin with.
Sure.
After the Fayetteville inaccuracy from Mr. Ray, you learn that he lives in Alaska, right?
Yes.
And you learn that there's been contact between him and Mr. Baker, correct?
Correct.
Do you attempt to find out if Mr. Austin was in Los Angeles the day of the murder?
Yes.
And how do you do that?
Wrote two ways. I wrote a phone application, search warrant for his cell phone.
So you knew his cell phone number?
I'm sorry. I'm all
That's
scattered.
okay. Take
I
your
wrote
time.
I wrote a search warrant for airline manifests.
Okay. And that was when approximately?
That was approximately, I believe that was late 2021.
Okay. So late 2021, you try to determine if Mr. Baker flew down to Los Angeles at or near the time of the murder, right?
Mr. Austin.
Mr. Austin, sorry.
Yes, sir.
And what did you learn?
Well, he wasn't on any in that search warrant, he wasn't on any passenger manifests.
And the reason was you were looking for direct flights as opposed to layovers.
I was looking, not only that, because it's hard to write for a layover, but it was too wide of a search. I was looking for all passenger manifests because there was only a couple flights that flew from Alaska into LAX. So I wrote for the entire, who was on the entire flight, looking for a specific name. And it wasn't until I actually wrote for the name of Christopher Austin on any flight that I came back with that information.
Well, what you knew is his name at the time you wrote the first search warrant, correct?
Yeah, I just didn't, I wrote it broad and then it didn't work out. So I figured out another way to write it.
And how much later was that?
Well, there was some stuff in between that.
Can you tell us if the stuff is relevant to your search for the second killer?
It is relevant.
Then please.
Okay. In January of 2022, we contacted federal agents up in Washington State, in the Vancouver area, and asked them to conduct surreptitious surveillance on Christopher Austin to try to capture his DNA so that we could compare it to the unknown samples in this case.
So the DNA, which is mainly in the form of blood, is that correct?
Correct,
From the
yes.
family residence.
Right.
DNA came back to Baker. I assume some of it came back to Fabio, the victim, and perhaps other members of the family. I don't know. But you had some DNA that came back unknown. In other words, you don't know whose DNA it was because you didn't have a suspect to compare it with, correct?
Yeah, unidentified.
Unidentified. Okay. And in fact, the defense at that time was encouraging the prosecution and you to put that DNA in a CODIS.
That's incorrect.
Well, did the defense request that somehow that unidentified items be compared to whoever the suspect was, whether it's Austin or anyone else?
My,
It's irrelevant.
It's already gone into, it's overruled.
my memory at the time was that there was unknown samples and that the prosecutor tried to relay to the defense that they had to be tested through an accredited laboratory in order to be placed in CODIS. And we were assured that the court was assured that that would be done and released all the unknown samples to the defense.
But the defense
Can I,
was the
I'd like to,
defendant.
I'd like to finish.
Witness to finish your answer.
You may finish your answer.
Go on.
They were able to deduce a profile from that unknown DNA. Because they didn't use an accredited
Who's
laboratory,
they? Who's they?
the defense, I believe it was Baker's defense attorney.
Mr. Simran,
But
correct?
it wasn't the prosecution.
And it wasn't Ms. Sementilli's attorney either.
Well, you asked me to explain, and I'm
Okay.
trying to explain.
Just let us know who the defense is.
She's finishing. Hold on a second, counsel.
Okay. So, because it wasn't with an accredited laboratory, our laboratory could not upload it into CODIS without losing their accreditation. They can only work with laboratories that, I know we had testimony of what it takes to get accreditation. And because that wasn't done, we have this unknown sample that we're not allowed to do anything. We can't even direct comparison to an individual.
And this involved the attorney for Mr. Simran, who's got the DNA and
For
the
Mr.
unaccredited
Baker.
lab, not Ms. Sementilli.
It involved the attorney, Mr. Simmerin, who is the attorney for Mr. Baker.
Okay. The defense was requesting that somehow it be uploaded and the right person be apprehended as soon as possible, correct?
And Your Honor, I object. It's irrelevant.
That question sustained.
Well, this is all occurring in what year?
I believe that was in 2021. 2021?
Or 22?
2021, 22, the best of my recollection. It went on.
So, knowing, well, when did you first learn that Mr. Austin had in fact flown down to Los Angeles?
It was the third search warrant that was written for manifests. I believe it was in December of 2022 or January of 2023. I think it was January of 2023. He was on a manifest with Alaskan Airlines.
Okay, and showed what?
That he bought a ticket via Kayak, which is a travel booking site, to fly out of Anchorage, Alaska, with a layover in Seattle, landing in LA at Los Angeles International Airport, 34 or 36 in the morning, on January 22nd, 2017.
The day before the murder.
Yes, with a return ticket to return to Anchorage, Alaska from Los Angeles International Airport on January 24, 2017, which he changed at the gate shortly after the murder, the night of the 23rd.
So you had evidence of Mr. Austin coming down the day before the murder, scheduled to go home the day after the murder, and then changing his home flight to the day of the murder.
Correct.
So I assume LAPD at that point went up to Vancouver or Alaska or got someone to go up and arrest Mr. Austin and find out what's going on.
No, we don't. It's more complicated than that when you're dealing with an individual that's in another state. Can't just go up and arrest them.
I understand, but you can get an arrest warrant, correct?
Correct.
And you could have that if it's signed based on the evidence you had at the time. You could have that forwarded to the law enforcement agency wherever Mr. Austin was living. Where was that again?
Vancouver, Washington.
Okay, it's in the United States, correct?
Yes.
So they could arrest him based on the arrest warrant, and then LAPD could have gone up and interviewed him and found out what was going on in 2022.
I'm going to object as soon as facts, not evidence.
Sustained.
Did anyone from the Los Angeles Police Department or any other law enforcement agency in LA you know of attempt to have Mr. Austin arrested in 2022?
2022?
Yes, when you said that you got the
That was
information.
2023.
2023, fair enough.
Yes.
And was he arrested?
No.
Why not?
The question was, did we attempt? Yes. Was he arrested? No.
They wouldn't arrest him based on your arrest warrant?
I didn't have an arrest warrant.
Did you seek one?
I went to the district attorney, tried to get a filing for the case. I didn't have enough at that stage to get a filing for the case. I was working with the FBI in Washington
On this case?
on this case in June of 2023. They would not do a Perkins operation or arrest Mr. Austin without a UFAP warrant, which is a unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. They would not assist me in any operation and arrest without a filed case. They were not comfortable in doing it. There were too many variables, and they thought it put their agents at unnecessary risk.
So the result was a cold-blooded killer remained on the streets from 2023 to 2024. October 2024, correct?
I'm going to object argumentative.
Listening.
So, did you seek an arrest warrant for what you needed from the DA's office?
I did.
And it was declined, correct?
I didn't have enough evidence at the time.
Did you have enough evidence to have officers from the Vancouver Police Department arrest Mr. Austin and question him and see if he would confess or give any information about the murder?
That is not a way that I did choose to run this investigation at the time. If I knew I didn't have enough evidence, and I'm not sure that Mr. Austin is going to even talk to me, and I alert him that I'm looking at him for murder, and he says, "Pound sand, I don't want to talk to you," and I have to release him because I don't have a warrant. Now I'm letting a cold-blooded murder out for the rest of his life, most likely.
So we're going to interrupt. We're going to take our afternoon adjournment this time till tomorrow at 9 a.m. The evidence applies not to discuss this case either among yourselves with anyone else or to form or express any opinions or the cause is finally submitted to you. Have a good evening.
Your Honor,